Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you for being here today. I'm Pelin Oğuz, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of IPC, Istanbul Policy Center. I'm sure you all know, but maybe I can just give you a brief information about Istanbul Policy Center. IPC is a global policy research institute, specializes in a variety of issues like social, political issues ranging from democratization to climate change, international relations to local governance. So we work on a variety of topics with our researchers and our scholars. And over the course of 23 years now, we have been providing policymakers, opinion leaders, major stakeholders, innovative policy recommendations, as well as objective analysis. One of the important things that we give importance to at IPC is to combine scientific research with hands-on policy work. And today we are very privileged to host this discussion at IPC in collaboration with NATO, because we are committed to creating a platform for dialogue and exchange of ideas on current issues that are challenging our world today. The issue of the discussions of NATO are quite relevant and important for today's world as well. Initially grounded in collective defense, NATO's mission has expanded over the years. And now it is beyond even that there are questions to go beyond even the territorial borders to tackle with challenging issues like cybersecurity, like climate change. But to what extent NATO's security expansion is going to be able to address these issues? These are going to be discussed today. We are very fortunate to have you all here. Thank you for coming. I also would like to thank the panelists, and you are going to see other panelists throughout the day as well. And before I give the floor to my colleague, Megan, I also would like to thank her for putting this whole thing together, Megan Gisclon from IPC. And also I'd like to thank our IPC colleagues that are working at IPC who helped to organize this whole event. I wish you a fruitful conference, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Pelin. I think I'm microphone. Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go. I can project as an American here, so no worries. But thank you all for coming today. So we're going to have a very exciting discussion ahead of us, as you've all seen in our program. Our first panel today is on NATO at 75, and we're going to kind of be looking through NATO's history as we have our lovely group of ambassadors here who are great representatives. And also, in addition to thank you, Pelin, I would also like to thank NATO PDD for sponsoring the event today. And I would also like to thank our friend Ece, who's the coordinator from NATO, for helping us put things together. I would also thank you for coming. I would like to also thank IPC's team for helping me coordinate everything. And I would also like to thank all of our support, the caterers, translators, etc. So without further ado, I will go through and give a brief biography of our three speakers today. First, we're going to hear from Ambassador Ahmet Uzumcu, who served as the Turkish permanent representative to NATO from 2002 to 2004. As a career diplomat, he served as Turkey's permanent representative to the UN office in Geneva, where he chaired the Conference on Disarmament in March 2008. Ambassador Uzumcu has also served as Deputy Undersecretary of State for Bilateral Political Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as Ambassador to Israel, and as Consulate General in Aleppo. In 2009, he was appointed Director General of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons and served in that role until 2018. During his tenure as Director General, Ahmet Uzumcu received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of OPCW in December 2013. Today, he continues to serve as Vice Chairman of the Board of the Global Relations Forum, Senior Fellow at the European Leadership Network, Senior Fellow at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, and Senior Advisor with the Council on Strategic Risk. Secondly, we have Ambassador Huseyin Dirioz, who served as NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Defense Policy and Planning from 2010 to 2013. Following his tenure at NATO, he served as Turkey's ambassador to Brazil and Russia, taking up the latter post in 2016. He recently retired from the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs after serving over 40 years. During his career, he also served as Turkey's ambassador to Jordan from 2004 to 2008, as chief foreign policy advisor to the president of Turkey, spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, minister consular in the Turkish embassy in Washington, D.C., NATO international staff as head of defense policy section, and in his early career as a diplomat in Afghanistan. He is also an alumnus of the NATO Defense College in Rome. Today, he is the vice president of the Foreign Policy Institute in Ankara. And then last but certainly not least, we have Ambassador Mehmet Fatih Ceylan, who served as the Turkish permanent representative to NATO from 2013 to 2018. In 2019, he retired from the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs after almost 40 years of service. Prior to his post at NATO, Ambassador Ceylan served as the Deputy Undersecretary for Bilateral Political Affairs from 2010 to 2013, Director General for Bilateral Political Affairs for Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and Central Asia from 2009 to 2010, and Ambassador to Sudan from 2006 to 2009. He also has extensive experience working in the field of security and defense, having served as Deputy Director General at NATO Department from 2004 and 2006, Head of NATO Department from 2002 until 2004, Deputy Permanent Representative at the WEU and EU in charge of security and defense matters from 2000 until 2002, and his successive appointments right before and after the end of the Cold War as the first secretary at NATO Military Affairs Department from 1988 until 1990, and as the first secretary and counselor at the Turkish Permanent Mission to NATO from 1990 to 1995. Today, he serves as the director or the president of Istanbul Policy Center and continues to write for various think tanks and media outlets. Without further ado, I guess we can begin with your opening remarks, Ambassador Uzumcu.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Before I get into my introductory remarks, I would like to say a few words about the demise of Professor Fatih Kayman, who was a friend of all of us, actually. We, three of us, express condolences to the bereaved family of Professor Kayman, to his colleagues and students. He was a leading academician in the field of political science and international relations. His remarkable contributions to the education in different universities in Turkey, as well as to the relevant literature through his publications, have been highly appreciated by everyone. The IPC, I know, was very dear to him. He worked till the last few weeks. Actually, he invited me to this event less than 2 months before his demise. And we actually accepted, all three of us, to come here upon his invitation. So rest in peace, Professor Kayman. Now on NATO, I worked at NATO in different capacities. I was appointed first to the Turkish delegation to NATO in 1986. After 3 years, I switched to the International Secretariat of NATO, to the political department. And after some years, actually, I returned as ambassador to the North Atlantic Council in 2002. I believe that NATO, in fact, is rightly considered as the most successful alliance in the history. And not only because its longevity, now it's celebrating its 50th year, actually, it's celebrated this year, its 75th year. But also because of its ability to adapt to changing circumstances. So that's even more important, I guess, than the number of years it survived. And it was able to remain relevant, in fact, in the field of defense and security. So NATO is a defensive organization, and its main, task is to ensure the security of its members. When I went to NATO in '86, it was 16. Now it's 32, so it's doubled since then. And it continues, in fact, to accept, as happened in the case of Sweden and Finland recently, new members based on the Article 10 of the Washington Treaty. And it was founded in 1949, basically to counter the Soviet expansionism, but also prevent the rise of militant nationalism once again in Europe. Lord Ismay, the first Secretary General of NATO, famously said NATO was founded to keep the Americans in, the Soviets out, and the Germans down. So I don't know whether the first part will still remain, valid in the coming years, but we'll see it. The Washington Treaty of 9 April 1949 committed each member to share the risk, responsibilities, and benefits of collective defense. The treaty also stated that NATO members formed a unique community of values committed to the principles of individual liberty, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So that's extremely important, in fact, even when NATO considers to invite new members, it pays attention, in fact, that this particular country observes, in fact, these principles and in letter and in spirit, and this is basically the main criteria for the adoption of new members to NATO. In addition to defense, collective defense and key values, the principles of consultation and consensus decision-making define the spirit of the organization. I'll come back to this consensus decision-making later on. I believe that's one of the most important characteristics of the organization of the alliance. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty has been the cornerstone of the alliance, according to which if an ally is the victim of an armed attack, each and every other member of the alliance will consider this act of violence as an armed attack against all members and will take the actions it deems necessary. So this phrase, it deems necessary, was introduced, actually included in the treaty upon the insistence of the Americans when it was negotiated. And interestingly, the Article 5 was invoked only once after the 9/11 attacks in support of the United States. The adaptation of NATO could be followed by looking at the strategic concepts of the alliance. There have been 8 strategic concepts so far. 4 of them were negotiated and adopted during the Cold War. And these were basically prepared by the military within the alliance. And after the end of the Cold War, in 1991, 1999, 2010, and 2022, all those 4 strategic concepts have been public documents, unlike the previous ones, which were kept confidential. And the last 4 strategic concepts actually were rather negotiated and drafted by the political side of the alliance. And the strategic concepts are important because actually they define the policies of the common policies of the organization to be followed by member states as well as by the Secretariat of NATO. The Secretariat of NATO, where I also worked, as I said, is as important, actually, is quite different than other international organizations. So it has a lot of weight. The Secretary General actually chairs the meetings, of course, the regular meetings of the North Atlantic Council, which are attended by the permanent representatives of member countries, but also of foreign ministers, defense ministers, the heads of state and government, and so on. And the Secretariat prepares the documents and issues also the revised versions of such documents upon the requests of member states when they are negotiated. So it has the ability, in fact, to see the broader picture, the common actually points made by member states, and tries to work out the compromise, in fact, solutions among them. Now about the end of the Cold War. Actually, I was supposed to start after the end of Cold War, but I want to speak also a little about the history. The developments, in fact, which led to the end of the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact and so on, as you know, began in Poland, in fact, by the trade union called Solidarity, Olensa, and so on, and it spread to other Warsaw Pact countries. Our generation, in fact, were able to watch somehow on live on TVs and so on such developments. We watched the fall of the Berlin Wall on 9th November 1989. In 2 days, it will celebrate the 35th year of that. So that was a remarkable development in the history. In December 1989, we watched the trial and execution of Ceausescu, which were not expected at all. Many observers, in fact, thought that Ceausescu regime would survive in Romania at that time, but it didn't. In 1990, the first Warsaw Pact country, the first former Soviet republic was Lithuania, which in fact declared its independence, which were followed by others. In July 1991, the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, and in December the same year, the Soviet Union, in fact, was broke off. And I remember we had a meeting of the North Atlantic Cooperation Council, which was founded the same year, which brought together the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries. And at the meeting of NACSI, as we called it in short, the Soviet ambassador, Afanasievsky, left the room for 5 minutes, and he came back and he announced the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So he entered the room first as the ambassador of the Soviet Union, and he left as the ambassador of the Russian Federation. So that was a historic moment, and all those who were present, including myself, we stood and applauded this announcement. These were historical times, but right after that, there was quite a debate, among member countries, but also observers, whether NATO would continue to be relevant, whether it was redundant or not, because the situation, the security environment had totally changed in Europe. And since its basic task was to ensure security in Europe, why we needed such an organization, which was also costly. But this debate, in fact, was, I think, somehow contained, and actually, I think this was Margaret Thatcher the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who said, you don't cancel, I quote her, you don't cancel your home insurance policy just because there have been fewer burglaries in your neighborhood during the last 12 months. So I think she had remarkable foresight. She was able to see that nothing was guaranteed, and we needed such an alliance in the future as well at that time. The solution of Soviet Union that time was rather peaceful. There were a few ethnic clashes in Central Asia. There was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but they were contained. But in former Yugoslavia, the situation was different. So we had to witness several conflicts, and in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in 1995, actually, finally they were able to reach agreement by the mediation of Americans, and the Dayton agreements were implemented, and the NATO decided, in fact, to deploy 60,000 troops in Bosnia for the implementation of such agreements, and the operation was called IFOR. Later on, Kosovo, another military operation was conducted, an air campaign, and deployment of KFOR, which was turned later on to the European Union. A few words about partnership. I mentioned the NACC, the North Atlantic Cooperation Council, established in 1991. It had a different name in 1997. It was called the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council. In 1994, we had established NATO established Partnership for Peace. Since I was there at that time as secretary, so that's why I say we. And it was actually aiming at having more tailored cooperation, with the individual partner countries. There's the Mediterranean Dialogue, which started in 1994. Istanbul Cooperation Initiative in 2004, it was adopted during the summit which took place in June 2004 in Istanbul. On enlargement, there have been, several rounds of enlargement. In the first three countries, it was in 1999, Visegrad countries, as we called them. Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary first joined. Then in 2004, another group of countries, actually, and it followed. So I won't name them, but as I said, the number has doubled since '86. On consensus decision, actually, I think there are some misperceptions about the decision-making in NATO. There has never been a vote when a decision is made at NATO. So the member countries do consult among themselves on the specific issues, and when there is an agreement, broad agreement, draft decision is brought to the North Atlantic Council, NAC, and the decision is made there without voting by consensus. That's very important. And on security and defense matters, actually, I think if the decisions are taken by consensus, they have a better chance to be implemented because it's upon the agreement of all. So it's a unanimity, but without voting. So I think I better stop here because so that we have enough time for discussions, especially after the elections in the United States. I think we may have a lot of points about the future of NATO and So back to you, Megan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. So, yeah, of course, I'm sure someone will ask something about the U.S. election. So, but yeah, what an exciting time to be at NATO, I'm sure, in the since 1989 that year. So, I mean, of course, we have a few less optimistically exciting things going on now in NATO and the world. So, I won't take up too much time. So we'll go for Ambassador Dirioz, too, who will continue our story of NATO, I suppose. So.
Thank you, Megan, for hosting this event. To IPC also thanks, and also my tribute also to late Professor Keyman, who was a good friend. Just a minor update. I am now the president of the Foreign Policy Institute, rather than vice president, but I mean, that's... Anyway, I will take up from where Ambassador Uzumcu left, but I want to add 2 points here before that. Indeed, we were with Ambassador Uzumcu and Ambassador Ceylan many times in NATO in different capacities, and in a sense we witnessed history being made, the strategic history being made. As you have said, I remember, I was in the committee that worked for the new strategic concept in 1991. I think we were in that committee, and I think that was an important change, not only because it was declassified, but also because NATO's strategy was deterrence and defense, and it added 2 new elements to it. One is crisis management, and one is the cooperative security. And in later iterations of the strategic concept, in 2010 and even in 2022, there were modifications, but the main change, I think, was made in 1991, broadening this NATO strategy. And deterrence and defense, I have to highlight that, as Ambassador Uzumcu mentioned, NATO is a defensive organization, and deterrence and defense is not chosen randomly, because deterrence comes before defense. If you are successful in deterring, then you don't have to defend or to fight. So it's a kind of, for preserving peace, deterrence is very important. Actually, I will say it in Turkish, because in an old Turkish, in a poetic way, they have a saying, hazır ol cenge eğer ister isen sulhu salah. Be prepared for war if you want peace and calm. So, but Ottomans did not devise this expression. They, I think, got it from the Romans, because in Latin they say siva pacem, if you want peace, parabellum, be prepared for war. So it's a commonsensical thing. So NATO was based in the same philosophy, not to war, but to prevent war. And to prevent war, you have to be prepared, as Ambassador Uzumcu explained, after the Second World War, how to provide security, how to bring the Americans in and keep them there, and how to prevent nationalism and nationalistic strifes within Europe, and how to organize their defenses, etc. It's a longish story. And again, in witnessing history, I was also there watching the Berlin Wall being falling at the time, end of the Cold War. And at the time, we were in NATO headquarters when then the first Soviet and the last Soviet also foreign minister came to NATO headquarters. He became later the president of Georgia, Mr. Shevardnadze, but at that time, he was the foreign minister of Soviet Union. He came to NATO headquarters, and we were at the protocol entrance as international staff. At that time, I was in the international staff, and we were applauding him as he entered, and history was being made. Actually, when I was saying this to some of my Russian colleagues when I was ambassador in Moscow, they said yes, and we were crying at that time. But so history being made. Well, I'll start from 2008, from where Ambassador Uzumcu left. The political evolution of NATO, indeed, Cold War, Second World War, then and then establishment of NATO, Cold War, then Détente period, then post-Cold War period. And then we entered, I think, the Cold Peace period rather than Cold, and maybe we may be entering a new Cold War period. In 2008, two significant events. One was the, I think, Bucharest summit, where it was decided with, to some extent, American insistence and some resistance from European allies that at that time, that Georgia and Ukraine will be members eventually, it said. And it's perhaps coincidence or not that the same year Russia attacked, intervened, attacked in Georgia, 2008. So it was the beginning of the unraveling of the cooperative security element, because, as I mentioned, the new strategic concept had deterrence and defense for sure, and then crisis management and cooperative security. Crisis management was there because you don't throw away your insurance because there are no burglaries. So, but therefore you have this multinational machinery organization at your hand, and you can put it into good use when there are massacres happening in former Yugoslavia or other places, and you can manage the crises which may spread or which may destabilize further Europe and your security as well. Therefore, that element was there, and cooperative security was summarized as extending hand of friendship to former adversary, mostly meaning the Soviet Union at that time. I was in the first delegation, NATO delegation, that went to Moscow actually at that time. And but it takes two to tango. And with 2008, we saw that Russia, or Soviet Union at that time, did not take that hand of friendship, or at least I mean, unraveled or put it in abeyance, the cooperative security, which we tried to work hard. We had established the Cooperation Council or NATO-Russia Council, and we were hopeful. It didn't work. And therefore, then came, because NATO is tried to interfere with crisis also because of the 9/11 event, and then what happened in former Yugoslavia and other instabilities. So you had to address them and work for them in certain regions against them. And then came the 2014 intervention or attack towards Ukraine and annexation of Crimea, the little green men appearing in Donetsk, Luhansk, and other parts of Ukraine. And these always show to us that the cooperative security is fine. Nevertheless, NATO tried to push it forward until, of course, then came the 2022 attack, blatant attack on Ukraine. But in the meantime, of course, security concerns multiplied. We had new types of security issues. I think Mr. Ceylan, Ambassador Ceylan, will dwell on all these aspects of strategy, from cyber defense to climate change and other global challenges, which also could be taken up. Plus, of course, NATO-EU cooperation, that was important, because EU, as it developed from economic community, steel and coal and steel community, to economic community, then to political union, then they said, well, we need a defense dimension, European common foreign and security policy. But again, European security in the age of strategic weapons requires the North American connection. It's part and parcel of the overall NATO's coherence, and therefore there's a limit. But there was good interaction between European Union at that time and NATO. And recently, I think 2-3 days ago, the new Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Rutte, has met with Madame von der Leyen, and they talked about how to further the cooperation between EU and NATO, which would be a good thing, of course. Let me see, sorry. Well, with what happens in Ukraine, of course, that again was another, as the Russian attack on Ukraine, the war on Ukraine. Again, we came to an even worse stage in our relations. And I think in the meantime, when all these developments were happening, they didn't come so smoothly. We had out-of-area debate. There were some who said NATO area is clear, so we cannot go and manage crises, even though they may endanger European security or our security, or they may cause a lot of human suffering, so where we can interfere where we have the means. And then there was a slogan, we have to go out of area, otherwise we will be out of business. It was another debate, which again resurfaced with Trump administration, was the burden sharing debate. This was a long debate in NATO for a long time. Sometimes those who spent under the indicative line, 2% of the GDP, I think, on defense, were considered as not burden sharing, but burden shedding. And there was always that criticism of burden shedders. And with Trump, I don't know how it will evolve or unfold eventually. Again, as I said, there came the Russian aggression on Ukraine in 2022, February. I think Putin made three mistakes initially. He underestimated the Western and NATO unity. And I think some of the allied leaders gave ammunition to that, including Mr. Trump, who said NATO is obsolete. And as you know, deterrence is important and key to NATO's strategy, because deterrence and defense, as I said, is the backbone of NATO strategy. And deterrence is more important than defense because it prevents war. And deterrence has, according to our interpretation or analysis, has two elements in it. Deterrence, one is the capabilities. You need to have capabilities, tanks, naval gunboats, ships, rockets, airplanes, fighter planes, etc., and all the organizational network commands. But the second aspect of deterrence is equally important, is political will. That's why the summit communiques, ministerial communiques are very important, because they show the intention and they complement the capabilities. Capabilities without expression of intention may not be as strong as a deterrent than the ones with the intention, political will, political intention. And when the leader of an important country says NATO is obsolete, that may give ideas to Putin or people like him. And therefore, Putin underestimated the Western unity under these statements, but he reinforced the Western and NATO unity with his attack on Ukraine, which meant that the danger is there for the rest of Europe, or maybe there. Therefore, again, there was this tightening up. The second, I'm not sure whether I'm sure he underestimated the Ukrainian identity, if I may so. He's quoted as saying, we are brothers, and I remember Zelensky answering, yes, we are brothers, like Abel and Cain, who murdered each other. And he overestimated his usable force, meaning the conventional force, because their usable force is very monolithic, not autonomous, very tank columns of 5 kilometers long, like sitting ducks, etc., whereas Ukrainians are trained on more 21st century techniques, more autonomous, more mobile, more agile. So these were later he made another set of three mistakes, which is the so-called sham referenda, which even Russia friendly considers that may be considered Russia friendly or Russia neutral, did not recognize or criticize, including China, by the way, or India or Serbia, did not recognize these referenda in Ukraine, occupied Ukrainian provinces. Secondly, the conscription decision he made, because he was running out of soldiers, and now I understand their conscription goes as far as North Korea now. I mean, the North Koreans appear there. But because they didn't call it a war, they called it a special military operation, not to scare people off and not to remind them of what their episode in Afghanistan, etc. But then again, when conscription began, many young people at that age, military age, started leaving Russia, and it caused strain. And what kind of war this is that you again go for conscription? And thirdly, the mistake was the nuclear talk. He maybe sometimes himself didn't talk about it, but he asked Medvedev or others to talk about the tactical nuclear weapon use, because as we all know, the nuclear weapons have existential value, and they have more value when they are not used. Just talking about them have its effect. Therefore, all these contributed to, plus he had a narrow circle. He tried to change that circle by doing away with Shoigu and bringing in economists, because the economy was suffering under sanctions, etc. Of course, it's a big power, and still it can survive. But nevertheless, they brought an economist as defense minister. Anyway, so this is where we are with our relations with Russia now. I don't know when the day after will come. Will it come? How will it come? And will we be able to return back to cooperative security again, which, but not under the conditions of surrender, but under the conditions of, again, the principles that make NATO come together and survive the longest this kind of unity and alliance in history. I don't know whether I exceeded my time or anything. Yes, of course, there are some questions about the enlargement of NATO, but it was no, again, Russia had its signature under certain acts like NATO-Russia Council founding acts and Helsinki Act and many other acts where countries are free to choose their defense setups or makeups and organizations. Therefore, it's a non-starter, I think. Plus, as I mentioned to you, we always believe that NATO is a defensive organization in the first place, defense through deterrence, which is the safest way of defending yourself and preventing war. So with that, I conclude my remarks. One final thing. Of course, it will be a fortune telling whether Mr. Trump in his new administration will again continue to, I think he will not continue this talk about NATO is obsolete or distancing Europe, and I don't think he will go to that now that the election time is over and he won't have a third chance. So I think he will act more reasonably in this area, I hope, but I'm not sure. I keep my fingers crossed. Thank you.
Yes, we also hope so. He'll change his tune. But sort of now that more allies have maybe contributed some, they're closer towards 2%, we can hope that make it more reasonable. Well, thank you for emphasizing many points that were very important about NATO, but I would like to say especially the deterrence and then defense aspect, because I think that's misconstrued a lot amongst the public. And then also, of course, about the Russian partnership as well with NATO, sort of before in the 90s and early 2000s. All right, so I'll pass the floor to you, Ambassador Ceylan, to continue our story of NATO.
Thank you, Megan. Well, let me also, at the very outset, let me express my gratitude to Istanbul Policy Center and also NATO Public Policy Division for organizing this important event on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of NATO. And let me align Ambassador Uzumcu's remarks dedicated to condolences for Professor Ceylan, who was a very good friend of all of us. My destiny or luck or curse, I don't know how to describe it, has been that I have been extensively involved in military affairs at NATO, defense planning, and what have you. And my part is the most boring part, I can assure you. That's why I'll try to make it as attractive as possible, and also as simple as possible for the audience to understand the technicalities involved in military and defense planning of NATO, which has also undergone transformation during different time periods with different conditions. And in my presentation, I shall focus on the military transformation of NATO, especially in the period from 2008 till now, when there was this Russia-Georgia war in August of 2008. It's already been underlined by both of my colleagues that the strategic concepts, the main strategic documents adopted by NATO are important, have always been important, and the tenets defined in these strategic documents are always taken into account by the political authorities of NATO. It's politics that drive the military strategies, which was not particularly the case during the Cold War period, because as Ambassador Uzumcu mentioned, the center stage was taken by the military planners, high-level military planners, and high-level NATO commands. But that changed following the end of the Cold War. And when you look to the entirety of these strategic concepts, one can observe that NATO operates in different security environments. The security landscape changes. NATO strategies adapt to those changing security conditions. Threats also change, and the strategic concepts of NATO, which are the main basis for military and defense planning within NATO, they also change and adapted to the different nature of threats that the alliance and its members face. Now, during the Cold War, it was clear the enemy or the main adversary was the Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact, and the core task of the alliance has been to deter the adversary from launching an attack, an armed attack against any member of the alliance. And should there be an armed attack, then repel the enemy forces and restore the territorial integrity of the member under attack. I'm talking about the gist of Article 5 of Washington Treaty, collective deterrence and defense. In its very simple form, it's one for all and all for one. I mean, that's the backbone of collective deterrence and defense. And during the Cold War period, the mantra was push the button. The defense plans were prepared accordingly. Everyone was alert, vigilant, and ready for an armed attack from the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact. So it was an automatic type of system. The the degree of autonomy entrusted in NATO's generals was much higher than in comparison to modern times. And that was reflected in all the defense plans at different levels. What do I mean by different levels of defense planning, or defense plans rather? It's at the strategic level. We are talking about the highest level of commands, and then you have the operational in-between level, and then the tactical part that considers the theater of operations or the theater of missions. And this push-the-button principle was embedded in all those levels of defense planning. We are talking about the Cold War era, of course. And in that period, those plans, particularly defense planning and defense expenses, they were capability-driven. Keep that buzzword in mind, capability-driven, which meant that each member of the alliance is obliged to allocate 3% of GDP threshold for its defense expenditures, at least 3%. And of course that meant the high degree of investment in defense and major procurements, defense procurements. In the post-Cold War period, up till 2014, when Russia occupied and annexed Crimea and started to destabilize the Donbas region of Ukraine, the flow of events changed, with implications for the alliance's defense and military planning and strategies. It's already been mentioned that the alliance has 3 core tasks, that is collective deterrence and defense, crisis prevention and management, and cooperative security. And these 3 core tasks are not new to NATO. Even in the initial stages, collective deterrence and defense, certainly that was in the sharp focus, but the concepts of crisis prevention and management and cooperative security, they were also reflected in the early strategic concepts of NATO, particularly in the aftermath of what happened in Suez in 1956. And this out-of-area issue, although not termed as such, was introduced into NATO planning in the wake of 1956 Suez crisis. So out-of-area is not something strange to NATO. And it didn't start with the Balkans operations like in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. Much before, the genesis of this out-of-area issue lies in the 1956 Suez crisis and what happened after that crisis. So, in the post-Cold War period, starting with the adoption of NATO's post-Cold War strategy in 1991, collective deterrence and defense was by and large put at the back burner of alliance consultations and planning, and crisis prevention and management and cooperative security took to center stage. And the famous or infamous term used then was peace dividend. Peace dividend. So the surge or urge to leverage peace dividend was very visible, and that culminated in the decline of defense expenditures, particularly by our Western European allies. And today we are paying the price for that in the face of Russian aggression in Ukraine. And the threat environment certainly changed. There was the precedence of asymmetric rather than conventional threats, asymmetric threats such as terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, organized crime, cross-border movements, which has become very popular now, migration issues. But that was also addressed, at least generically, in the early 1990s. And regional conflicts and instabilities, of course, like Saddam invading Kuwait, and then you have Bosnia-Herzegovina, and then Kosovo, and on and on. And in that period, where peace dividend was preferred, there was the flourishing of European security and defense policy, ESDP, together with Common Foreign and Security Policy, CFSP. Then it became Common Security and Defense Policy after the Lisbon Summit in 2010. I'm talking about the EU Lisbon Summit. But you have to take account of the fact that this European security and defense policy was rooted in NATO, starting in the late 70s and then up till the end of the Cold War. So it was inherited from the European efforts within NATO during the Cold War period, and Turkey was part of it. I have to underline that. From the very beginning, we were part and parcel of European efforts within NATO, which had a dramatic turn, of course, after the EU started to develop its European security and defense policy, and to be very blunt, sidelined Turkey from its efforts in European security and defense efforts. That's a mistake, and that would be understood better, particularly under present circumstances. Another issue that's of relevance for defense and military planning in the post-Cold War period, of course, then the idea was to introduce leaner, smaller, smarter defense assets and capabilities to support the defense planning processes within NATO. And then the main idea, I mean, the philosophy that lied behind it was effects-based defense planning. I talked about the capability-driven principle during the Cold War period. In the post-Cold War period, before we had dramatic turn of events following Russian aggressions, we had this effects base. So you have to achieve NATO's level of ambition, and by level of ambition I mean the number of wars NATO could wage if there's an attack against any member. So this had to be achieved, NATO's level of ambition, with leaner, smaller, more mobile, and and smarter. By smarter I mean with higher firepower, more advanced military technologies, and what have you. So it's like the words deployability, mobility, usability, and expeditionary forces. Command structures to be, accordingly. That's what those people had in mind. Achieve more with less. Let's put it that way. With less forces, leaner command structures, and more effects on the theater of operations or missions. And then came 9/11, terror attacks in the United States, which changed the security landscape radically, and for individual and all members of alliance, for the alliance as a whole. And Article 5, has been mentioned, was implemented in the history of NATO for the first time, and that was not a request coming from the United States, by the way. The European allies decided to invoke Article 5. So there was no particular demand from the United States for NATO to invoke Article 5. I was there in Brussels then, when 9/11 terror attacks occurred. And what what was one of the main principles that started to shape defense and military planning? It was war on terror. You know, that was the popular term used often by many alliance leaders. And the end result was the ISAF operation in Afghanistan. It's a counterterrorism operation launched by NATO, mandated by the United Nations. That's important for legitimacy purposes in Afghanistan. So that's the first real war on terror under the helm of NATO in Afghanistan. And as the new millennium approached, a new era, a rather unhappy era, loomed large, accompanied by novel forms of threats, such as cyber, hybrid, space, climate, and risks related to emerging and disruptive technologies, EDTs. These were all reflected in NATO's defense and military planning. And the scene was opened, unfortunately, in 2014 by the Russian occupation and annexation of Crimea and the destabilization in Donbass, again initiated by Russia. And the second large-scale invasion by Russia on Ukraine has been the ultimate nail in the coffin, not only for the Euro-Atlantic security, but for the rules-based international order. Put differently, I mean, this is a big rupture in terms of global security order, or disorder nowadays. There was another consideration that alliance nations will have to take into consideration, and that's the rising influence of China throughout the globe, Chinese influence and competition worldwide. Another rather very unfortunate and dramatic turn of events in the Middle East further aggravated the global security situation, with ramifications for defense planning, force planning within NATO, which was decided at the Vilnius summit last year in 2023. So from 2014 onwards, that is in the wake of Russian occupation and annexation of Crimea, the effects-based premise for defense planning started to lose its attraction. So we said capability-driven during the Cold War, effects-based during this relative calm period between 1990 and 2014. But this started to lose its traction within the alliance defense planners, and a new understanding was launched. That is 360-degree approach. The challenge from the East and the challenge from the South. That was identified back in 2014 when Russia attacked Ukraine in Crimea. So there has been this transformation. It's also in compliance with the heading of this panel from Article 5 to 360-degree approach. And of course, this has entirely changed the defense and military planning within the alliance. Comprehensive approach to security, that's been one of the trademarks of the alliance, even in the early days of its presence. But that gained importance, particularly in the aftermath of 2014. The milestones for comprehensive security were laid down before, during this calmer period, in the post-Cold War period. And of course, one of the priorities became to revise the NATO's level of ambition vis-à-vis the Russian aggression in Ukraine, broadening its scope. And now comes the last part, in terms of defense and military planning. So there was a new dictum of intelligence-based, threat-focused, and capability-centric defense and military planning. So that's the last stage after the Russian aggression on Ukraine starting in 2014, which meant more cash, more capability, and more contributions from the allies. And that brought us to 2% challenge, 2% of GDP to be allocated for defense expenditures. I'm talking about the Wales Summit in 2014. And 20% of this defense expenditures to be allocated for major defense procurements. But many alliance members did not achieve this political target till 2024. I think out of 32 now, it's like 23 countries, including Turkey, are meeting this challenge of 2%. The rest, that remains to be seen. And the threats diversifying, new challenges coming to the scene, cyber and space becoming important after 2016. First, cyber has been adopted as an operational domain of NATO. 2019, then we had space as an operational domain, and now we have 5 operational domains: land, maritime, air, cyber, and space. It's always been 3 operational domains right from the very beginning of NATO till 2016. And then cyber and then space followed, and NATO now has to operate within 5 operational domains. And during that period, there are some buzzwords to keep in mind, like multi-directional threats and challenges, multi-domain operations, 5 operations, okay, 5 operational domains, multi-actor and multipolar world order. Now, these are the main, principles, or rather, the underlying priorities to be taken into account by alliance defense planners. And now, Ambassador Dirioz talked about the importance of deterrence. The idea is to avoid wars, to prevent wars, and that's called the concept of deterrence. And we have different forms of deterrence, and I think it would be important for the audience to pay attention to such forms, like deterrence by denial. Denial is to prevent war. To deter the enemy from waging a war, that's deterrence by denial, including, but not limited, what we call anti-access area denial, A2AD capabilities, both by alliance assets and capabilities, but also by the adversary. That's important. And deterrence by punishment. I mean, if deterrence fails, then you have to punish the enemy. And the enemy should know that before. Although not as clear as one may think, because there is uncertainty involved in maintaining and strengthening deterrence. And a very modern concept, deterrence by resilience. Resilience is Article 3 of the Washington Treaty. What exactly do we mean by deterrence by resilience? It's the ability to withstand, fight through and recover quickly from disruptions and shocks. That's resilience. That's the gist of resilience. And we have extended deterrence, of course, which partly covers the Euro-Atlantic area, but basically focuses on areas beyond Euro-Atlantic area. Now, what are the recent threats identified by the latest Strategic Concept 2022? It's Russia as a conventional threat, the most direct and significant threat for the alliance, and terror as an asymmetric threat. there are other threats remunerated in this strategic concept, like regional conflicts, instabilities, the importance of maintaining human security, and systemic rivalry emanating from China. But China is not a direct military threat for the alliance. That's clear. But it's a big challenge and also an opportunity to be decided among the powers concerned. Some opportunities are also present in our dealings with China. Now, what happened after Vilnius and particularly the Washington summit on the 75th anniversary? It's of course, the Allies decided to continue to spend more on defense, expanding their defense manufacturing capability for themselves as well as to support Ukraine, because the deficiencies have come to the surface while supporting Ukraine defenses, for instance. Munitions, shells, and high-tech material to be provided to Ukraine. And there have been deficiencies faced by the lack of defense manufacturing in the alliance, including the United States, particularly when it comes to munitions and shells for the artillery. So now the idea is to be ready to deter, respond to, and defend against, as necessary, any identified threat or aggression from any direction to be decided by consensus within NATO. I mentioned like cash contributions and capabilities. Ambassador Dirioz mentioned also some 3 Cs, Cold War, post-Cold War, you know, new Cold War, and what have you. So Cs are important in NATO. Okay. So we have now a different basis and a different strategic understanding that underlies defense and military planning within NATO, force and command structures as well. So NATO is operating under an entirely different security landscape, particularly after the Russian aggression that started in 2014, and now what's happening in the Middle East, and God forbid to have a further or wider conflagration. I think we should deploy all efforts to prevent it. So now the NATO members are obliged to stick to decisions taken at the highest levels in terms of defense planning, defense expenditures, and their capabilities and assets. Let me finish here. Thank you once again. Megan to IPC, please extend my thanks and our colleagues' thanks. Also to NATO Public Policy Diplomacy or whatever, Public Diplomacy Division, PDD, okay? Our thanks to them. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for your remarks, and also sort of getting into some of the more details with the strategic concept and what is all laid out in there. Well, I think we're a little behind on time, but I think we can push into the coffee break a little bit, so no big deal. We'll have audience questions, but I know our first question is actually going to come from the Consul General of Ukraine, Mr. Roman Nodolsky, and I think he also probably has a few comments on Ukraine as well, since...
Thank you very much, distinguished speakers. Dear Megan, thank you very much for the possibility to have this event and to participate in this event, because this theme, this topic is very important for Ukraine today, because beforehand...
Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. This topic is very vitally important for Ukraine today. You may understand why. I would like to, I will have just very short intervention during this conversation. So I will briefly tell you about the development of Ukraine-NATO relations
So we have the development of our relations like up and down. If we are not talking about 1990 years, because during that period of time it was a post-Soviet country, and level of support inside of the country of NATO membership was very low, because at that time NATO was considered just as a very aggressive bloc which wants to destroy the Soviet Union and all post-Soviet Union countries, including Ukraine. So society just was thinking about NATO like very aggressive bloc. The situation started to change in 2001, 2002, when support of NATO in Ukraine increased to 32%. And if we look at the statistics, also 32% of people, so they were not supporting NATO membership. Then situation started to change also, so the support of NATO started to decrease in 2008, especially after Russia's invasion of Georgia. In that time we had support of NATO membership approximately 40% of Ukrainians. But then in 2010, when we had our president Yanukovych and all stories, so Russia started to work with Ukrainian society, with Ukrainian government. So unfortunately we had many members of Ukrainian government, including Minister of Defense, who had the Russian passport. So these people started to destroy not only Ukrainian army, but also they were the society was in very bad situation, and support of NATO decreased to 20 and 80%. So only 80% supported membership, Ukraine's membership in NATO. Situation radically changed in 2004, definitely when Russia annexated Crimea and supported all these terrorist organizations in Donbass. At that time, the support of NATO membership decreased to 48%. And absolutely, in 2022, definitely the situation radically changed because support of NATO was, we had 82% of Ukraine's NATO membership support. It's obvious because people during the war, people feel threat, and they would like to have any kind of defense from partner countries. Also, in 2008, during Bucharest summit, you may remember that there were discussion and there was a goal. Ukraine, we were going to have invitation at that summit. We were going to have invitation for NATO membership, but unfortunately, Russians did all possible and impossible to destroy this possibility. Let's say. And in 2008, unfortunately, Ukraine did not receive this invitation. We also were going to get invitation during Vilnius summit, also during this year Washington summit, but unfortunately there was no invitation. You may know also that the President Zelensky, he presented his plan of victory. He presented this plan during his visit to the United States. He presented it to President Biden in September this year, also to candidate for presidency, Mr. Trump. Also, he had his tournée in EU countries where he presented his victory plan. Point number one in this victory plan is invitation of Ukraine to NATO. We have to understand that the only possible way to stop Russia and to stop this war of aggression in Ukraine is membership of Ukraine in NATO. No other elements will not work. No other measures will not work. We have to secure a country against Russia. You may remember that Ukraine, after when Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine was the third nuclear power in the world. Ukraine signed Budapest Memoranda in 1994, and Ukraine refused from its nuclear status. Unfortunately, Russia, as the country, Russia was a guarantor country, and Russia broke its obligations and invaded Ukraine. That's also, if you remember, in 2021, before Russian invasion, also in 2022, when Russia started its so-called special military operation in Ukraine, and they were announcing that, so we started this military operation in Ukraine because Ukraine was going to become a NATO member, and we feel threat that NATO borders we will have NATO borders here in Russia. That's why we feel a threat from Russia. But that is not also true, because if you remember, Finland and Sweden also became a NATO member. Finland has a very big border with Russia, and I don't remember any announcement from Russia that they feel some threat from Finland as a member of NATO. And one more thing that we have to understand, that Russia do not need territories. They are not fighting for territories. Russia is the biggest country in the world, so they are not fighting for territory in Ukraine. They are not fighting for people of Ukraine. They would like just to destroy the country. They would like to all people from Ukraine to flee from the country, because this is existential conflict. They would like that Ukraine never exists, that Ukrainian people never exist. That is existential conflict, and that's why we need support from NATO countries. I don't believe that Russia can invade any NATO member. Russia has no power to have a conflict with NATO as a bloc. Russia is after Russian-Ukrainian war, Russia is very weakened country, and Russia will never invade any NATO member country. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, since I'm also sure there's many people in the audience wondering about Ukraine in the context of NATO as well. So without further ado, we'll open up the floor. I think we can take perhaps 2 questions at a time, and we can have each one of you respond to whichever points you would like. So is there anyone in the audience who has a question? And also, could you please introduce yourself as well? And also, sorry, our online audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them, and we'll have someone watching.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Marion Zentka. I'm a journalist, and I liked every input of you, all of you ambassadors. Ambassador Dirioz, you quoted two famous quotes, and then you said that to prevent a war, you have to be prepared for it. And before, Ambassador Uzumcu, you talked about values also of NATO. And after that, Ambassador Ceylan, you said that strategies change and that threats also changing. And then in the end, you talked a lot about deterrence. So I want to ask you regarding NATO's future, because NATO has always been and is still, as far as I understand, is still not a peacemaker but a peacekeeper. But do you think that times are now changing, that you can only be a peacekeeper if you also become, but then in what terms, become a peacemaker? How is that concept maybe being discussed, and do you see any chance that there is a switch from NATO being just a keeper of peace or a maker of peace?
Okay, and then I think we also had a question here.
Heinrich Kreft. I'm a senior fellow here at IPC, but I was a German diplomat for 40 years and retired only recently. I have a question which goes in that direction of the colleague from Ukraine. To become a NATO member takes a long time because everybody has to agree. What Ukraine needs is security guarantees, probably long before it can become a NATO member. So what kind of security guarantee could NATO and NATO members, particularly the US, give to Ukraine for this time of transition, time of waiting until Ukraine really could become a member of NATO?
Would any of you like to start with either or both questions? Ahmet.
Before I get into responding to two questions, while I have the floor, I ought just to come back to my introductory remarks where I intended to just say a few words about the position of NATO as far as arms control and disarmament is concerned, but I forgot to do it. So if you allow me, I'll just mention it. NATO has always been supportive of arms control and disarmament initiatives. Going back to 72, for instance, Brezhnev and Nixon then signed the SALT I, so NATO expressed its support. There was the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 70s also, NATO extended its support. In conventional field, there was the CFE, Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, which was signed and entered into force in 91. The Chemical Weapons Convention, which entered into force in 97. So on all this, as well as on confidence building measures in Europe, transparency and so on, it expressed its support or contributed to such initiatives. So the objective of NATO has always been, in fact, to ensure the security of its member states at the possible lowest level of armed forces. So that also is a reflection of its defensive nature. That was just a few words on arms control and disarmament, which I believe is important. It's also against, obviously, proliferation activities in the nuclear field. It actually adopted a new position gradually to reduce the role of nuclear weapons, both in deterrence and defense, especially in defense. So that's always been, very consistent with its overall approach to security while adopting a broader concept of security over the years. Whether NATO could be a peacemaking organization, I think as far as the security of its member states, obviously it will be also a peacemaking. So it will defend with all its available means against any aggression and restore, as Fatih Ceylan said, restore the situation and so on. But as to the conflicts outside of its membership, where the members are not directly involved, I don't think NATO could play such a role, although in '94 it offered, in fact, its contributions to some military operations which could be undertaken upon the decisions of the UN Security Council or the OSCE. But again, this means that international community has to provide the legal basis for such operations. And as to Ukraine membership of NATO, we listened to the Consul General of Ukraine, and there was a follow-up question. I believe that Ukraine will one day become a NATO member. But at present, there won't be consensus on this among the membership. So the conflict has to stop. And I don't know what will be the parameters of the possible ceasefire or peace agreement and how and when it will happen. But I don't think that it will happen. NATO membership of Ukraine will not happen in the immediate or near future. It's going to take some time. In the meantime, whether there will be bilateral security guarantees by NATO members, especially the United States, that I don't know. To be honest, I read several articles about this, but especially after the results of elections in the United States, as Ambassador Dirioz said, we don't know how it's going to unfold, what will be the U.S. position on all those matters, and what should be actually the scope of the security guarantees to deter any further aggression by Russia. So that's it should involve obviously nuclear weapons, but as Ambassador Dirioz said, the actual statements by Putin, Medvedev, and others on the possible use of nuclear weapons did create a lot of actually noise among the international community, and I don't think they were helpful. I don't think they should be repeated by anyone. Therefore, there are several question marks, and I don't have a clear answer, but I'll leave it to my colleagues. Yeah.
On peacekeeping and peacemaking. Now, NATO is certainly a peacemaker if any member of it is under attack. That it will have to make peace. And that's the gist of collective defense, Article 5 commitment we are talking about. And by the way, I mean, I have to underline, because sometimes people think that this is kind of automatic procedure, invocation of Article 5. That's not the case. The Council will decide on whether to invoke Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. It's not an automatic process, as opposed to, for instance, Article 4, which, if any member of the alliance feels under threat, then it has the right to ask for convening of the Council, NATO Council, and this is an automatic process. I mean, nobody can say, hey, I mean, you are not under threat, so you cannot ask for the convening of the NATO Council. Article 5 is a different story. And the irony is that, for instance, the modified Brussels Treaty of 1955 is much stronger than the Washington Treaty of 1949 in terms of invoking Article 5. It also has an Article 5 clause in it. I'm talking about modified Brussels Treaty, much ambitious treaty provision in terms of European security and defense. But now it's also in the it's out of relevance now. Peacemaking could be possible only if there's an international legitimacy. I mean, we had witnessed its examples, for instance, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was seen at the initial stages as an out-of-area operation because of the German constitutional restriction. So when this restriction is lifted, then Germany started to join the bandwagon, let's put it that way. And by the leadership of President Clinton, then NATO was able to intervene militarily in Bosnia-Herzegovina based on the UN mandate. That's important. Also in Afghanistan, it's a UN-mandated operation, a warfare, it's not peacemaking, okay? Counter-terrorism operation, but peacemaking to try to eradicate Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and what have you, these derivatives in Afghanistan. But it went beyond the UN mandate. I mean, it became a kind of nation-building or institution-building mission rather than an operation. And then, I mean, to be very honest, NATO failed. A dramatic demise of that operation after 20 years, and Taliban coming to power. The main idea was to eradicate Taliban, but Taliban came back after 20 years of NATO presence in them. But NATO went beyond the mandate it was entrusted with by the United Nations Security Council. Operation Unified Protector, Libya, for instance, 2011, it's quote unquote, depends on how you look at it, but a peacemaking operation. Well, it's a controversial issue and controversial operation, but nevertheless, I mean, there was the United Nations Security Council resolutions, primarily 2 resolutions, on which there is no consensus between the West and Russia, by the way. So the NATO could undertake peacemaking operations, but there must be an international legitimacy for that. When it comes to attacks against its members, it's definitely a peacemaker. That's what Article 5 stipulates. So that's all I can say on Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed for your comments. But I think we have to look at the kind of background a little bit before making a rather very sharp comment on Ukrainian membership. Now, there was a study before the enlargement started in the post-Cold War period in 1995, that's called Study on Enlargement. That was conducted after Partnership for Peace and Mediterranean Dialogue. NATO was trying to set out the criteria and principles on which NATO could enlarge, okay? And when you look at the list of these criteria and principles, one principle is that any NATO member, of course, I mean, willing and able to contribute to Euro-Atlantic security and, you know, defense capability, defense and security sector reforms and what have you, but one principle was that any member should not have any territorial dispute with its neighbors, legally or in the field. This is one of the principles. The other thing is that, I mean, when I look at the, I've spent like more than 20 years in like defense plans and military planning and what have you. I have never ever seen any plan of offense within NATO. It's all focused on defense of Euro-Atlantic territory. If there are signs that NATO will have to intervene, like in the case of the Balkans or Afghanistan, then NATO military structures are certainly capable of developing offensive plans once authorized by the political, you know, people. So there are such plans, generic, but the onus of those plans is always on defending NATO territory. I mean, it's never ever been an offensive NATO plan. Now, on Ukraine, because this is the controversy, 2008, it was a compromise between particularly the United States and Germany. Angela Merkel was, you know, kind of, she acted as a kind of go-between trying to reach that compromise. I'm talking about the wording formulation included in the Bucharest summit declaration. The United States was, you know, it was very much in favor of inviting immediately Ukraine and Georgia to NATO membership. That was kind of opposed by Germany, France, and some other countries like Spain, Italy, and what have you. And then Angela Merkel took the lead, and this, you know, provision or wording was included in that summit declaration. And the consensus was, okay, Georgia and Ukraine will become NATO members, but the but part is important then. They instructed the foreign ministers to prepare membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia in December of the same year, 2008. You don't have any MAP, what we call membership action plan, because later it was said there is no need for MAP because Ukraine is proceeding in the path to becoming a member of NATO without membership action plan. And there is one hard fact that, the United States, okay, I'm a little hesitant to name the names, but such powers within NATO are not willing to kind of confront Russia militarily in the field by injecting NATO into this conflict. Rather, they prefer to support financially, militarily, diplomatically, economically, and what have you, Ukraine for its self-defense, for Ukrainian resilience. I mean, and let me tell you this, I mean, Turkey was among an informal group pro-enlargement. I remember sitting in informal settings, advocating for Georgian and Ukrainian membership to NATO. There was always this counter, arguments. And the main idea was, we don't have the luxury of fighting Russia militarily on the field. But we will continue to support Ukraine, and we will make Ukraine more resilient, more resistant against Russian aggression. And that's been, reflected in almost all summit declarations since 2008. So it will not happen. One has to be a realist on that. Soon. I think people will prefer to see the end result of the ongoing war, this aggression by Russia, and what kind of terms will emerge, and what kind of the general European security architecture will transpire at the end of this war. So it's one specifically to the war, focused on war, and the other is in the larger picture of the European security architecture. I think, and in this kind of structure, I think then people will decide, including extending Article 5 security to Ukraine. But that will take time. Thank you.
Just very quickly, because everything was said almost. Peacekeeping, peacemaking, maintaining the peace. NATO can contribute to prepare conditions for peacemaking by addressing conflicts, regional conflicts, auto area crises. It's not a peacemaker in that sense. It can only make peace or preserve peace for the members, but can contribute, because now that we have the crisis management and prevention as part of the strategy, can contribute to establishing conditions for peacemaking. As for security guarantees, usually from NATO side it comes with Article 5 and with membership, but that will depend, as the ambassadors have said, the kind of endpoint. Will there be an agreement? Will there be involvement of United Nations or OSCE or another Minsk group, or what kind of solution will emerge, and will NATO be able to contribute to the support of such a solution? But by itself, normally from NATO, it comes with Article 5. Thank you.
Paul.
Very short. I would like to reply to
I would like to reply to colleagues' question regarding how to secure Ukraine's guarantee during this period between Ukrainian membership and today. So we have a very good example of how to secure the country. For example, first of all, this is guarantees from the United States to Southern Korea or Israel. So, and on practice, we have already seen how it works in Israel when Iran launched missiles against Israel. So we have seen several U.S. Navy ships helping to catch Iranian rockets under Israeli territory. So such agreement with the first of all with the United States and with all other partners, so it could work also in the Ukrainian situation. And also concerning Ukraine's membership, NATO membership, so we have very active discussion inside of the country as well as active discussion with politicals, with our foreign partners. I'm absolutely aware that a relevant formula how to grant membership for the country with ongoing conflict could be found, well, not easily, but could be found. We have a discussion in Ukraine, it could be, so definitely all Ukrainian territory within internationally recognized borders should be should be a member of the NATO, all territory of Ukraine. But how to use Article number 5? It's a question for discussion. So this is the question. But definitely, the country with ongoing conflict could become a membership. Thank you.
Thank you for following up. Well, we are pushing our time quite a bit. So, but of course we started a bit late. But to not further sort of push us behind a bit, I'm just going to wrap up. And of course, I'm sure there are many questions in person, but we can maybe address them in the break or at lunch or throughout the day. But we do have one online question, which hopefully, okay. If you can make it very quick, then we'll also address both at the same time. I'm sorry, going to limit your response time to maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. My name is Natalia Lopatina. I'm a former colleague of Roman, and I had the privilege of working with some of you during my diplomatic tenures in Ankara. I would like to thank you so much for today's presentations. I have a feeling that in once I've read 3 memoirs books, and I really encourage you to write those books. I have questions regarding, I would like to ask your opinion about whether NATO performs enough and if there is any room for strengthening its role in the Black Sea as regards the war that Russia wages on Ukraine. So far we have had efforts by UN and Turkey in its own capacity to secure the grain deal. We have a trilateral initiative between Turkey, Romania and Bulgaria on demining. Other than that, we cannot boast of other interventions or other presences of NATO in the Black Sea. I would like to seek your opinion on what could be done to enhance this presence to ensure justice and peace in the Black Sea and secure global and regional interests, like for example freedom of navigation and food security and the like. And my second short question is we have witnessed a number of drone attacks on Ukraine, and occasionally these drones or their parts also landed in the NATO member states. The reaction, as you are well aware, was quite quiet to this. What does it send to the world and to Russia, the aggressor, in terms of defense and deterrence? Thank you.
And then I'm going to also read our one question that comes from online. And the question is, do you think NATO has been able to successfully counteract against the Russian aggression over the past 20 years? Which, of course, the 20 years part I find quite interesting. So I think you can also address that since, of course, when Ambassador Dirioz, when you were in NATO in 2010, in the strategic concept, Russia was a partner. So if you also want to comment on how it's evolved. And also, very sorry, maybe just 2 minutes from each one of you to also address both questions.
Go first. Okay. 2004, since 2004, what was the question for online question?
The online only question was, do you think that NATO has been able to successfully counteract against the Russian aggression over the past 20 years? They've asked, so.
Well, over the past 20 years, basically starting from 2004, let's say, it was still in the age of cooperative security, and cooperative security gave way to how should I say, the difficulties with Russia, and Russia is not, it takes two to tango, I said, not playing the tango, after especially 2008 with the Georgia aggression. So if you don't have that, then it doesn't work in that sense. About the Ukraine and Turkey's contributions were, of course, providing a venue for negotiations, as you mentioned, contributed together with the United Nations grain deal to the demining with the other countries of the Black Sea, and prisoner exchange also. But from NATO's side, there will continue, I think, economic support, political support, and defense-related support. But that's how I see, for the time being, how it will evolve. Sorry.
Okay. No, 20 years ago means 2004. Let's not forget that the NATO-Russia Council was founded in 2002. Let's not forget that even after the NATO-Georgia war in 2008, as you mentioned, in the strategic concept adopted at Lisbon summit, Russia was considered as a kind of strategic partner. That was mainly the wish of our Western European allies, particularly, supported by the Obama administration at that period. So there was no kind of Russia fixation. I'm talking about rather negatively, a negative perception of Russia in 2004, 2008, 2010. Even in 2016, after the annexation and occupation and annexation of Crimea, the decision taken by NATO at the Warsaw Summit was to continue with the bilateral track diplomacy with Russia. One pillar on collective deterrence and defense, don't attack any member of us, okay? The second was dialogue and engagement with Russia. That was the decision, double track, okay? I'm talking about Warsaw Summit. After 2014. And you have to find its traces, particularly within Western European allies. And we have seen concrete manifestations of this in different periods following 2014. On the Black Sea security, we cannot simply separate Black Sea security, but we should not only talk about maritime security, think it in terms of wider Black Sea security, okay? This is important. Now, I think the priority is for those countries in the region as NATO allies, Turkey, Romania and Bulgaria, to spend more and more on their naval capabilities. We cannot simply rely on other allies in enhancing our naval capabilities. For this reason, I think primarily and initially, these three little countries, little allies, should come together and explore opportunities to enhance and strengthen further their naval capabilities. This is important. And I think that process started. Secondly, we have to strengthen the naval capabilities of Ukraine as our partner, as our neighbor, against Russian aggression. These are the initial tasks that we will have to undertake. Fourth, of course, when conditions allow, there is no impediment whatsoever for NATO presence, not on a permanent basis, in the Black Sea, not on a permanent basis because of the provisions of the Montreux Convention. When Russia occupied and annexed Crimea, and look at the declarations by the alliance, all declarations, said rules-based order, international law, Montreux is part and parcel of international law. If Russia, or if NATO itself, or if any member of it itself undermines the Montreux Convention, then that will be against the fundamental principle of sticking to international law and not mimicking Russia in that respect. So we have to respect those provisions, particularly in times of war. What Turkey did was to close the straits to all warships. Russia could have deployed its warships docked to harbors in the Black Sea. We didn't allow it. Another important point is Turkey. We talked about it, yesterday at the dinner. But Turkey provides some pictures via NATO to Ukraine. Pictures on the movements in the air and also at sea. And that's very important for Ukraine to defend itself in the naval, in the maritime field. That's very important. And I'm talking about 70% of these pictures provided by Turkey through NATO to Ukraine. And the rest is met by other alliance members. This is extremely important. And that's not pronounced very often for different reasons. But I think there was no kind of disruption in providing this critical information to our Ukrainian friends. So we certainly are aware of the fact that things changed after 2008, not 2014. By Russia-Georgia war, I'm talking about the balances in the Black Sea, and it's not in Turkey's interest to see Russia gaining further influence in the Black Sea. That is a fact. That is also not pronounced very often, but that's back in our minds. So we cannot allow Russia to control the northern coastline of the Black Sea. That's a fact. And fortunately, because of Ukrainian efforts, Russia redeployed its naval forces from Sevastopol to the east, okay? So that's my answer to you.
Ambassador Uzumcu? No comment.
I think the reaction of both NATO and the Western countries bilaterally was not strong enough in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. It should have been stronger, going a little beyond the sanctions that were applied. I observed personally with dismay that some Western European countries actually thought that this was a normal, action by Russia. Going back to 50s and so on. Anyhow, that would, if it was done, actually, that would have probably helped deter further aggression in 2022. Just very briefly on the possible position of the new U.S. administration as of January next year vis-à-vis NATO. That's very important, how Trump administration will behave. And I don't think the U.S. will withdraw from NATO. That's what I think. But it's clear that the U.S. will reduce its support for NATO and will expect the European countries to play a more significant role in Euro-Atlantic area. Therefore, all member countries of NATO will have to prepare for that, including Turkey. Thank you.
Yeah,
Ambassador Uzumcu is my senior and my mentor in NATO affairs. So with all my respect and with his indulgence, we have a Turkish proverb that's rather meaningful and that comes to my mind from time to time. Whatever you are at the age of 7, you are the same at the age of 70. When we are talking about the Trump, the new president of the United States. So I think Europeans should get ready be vigilant for any type of certain, U.S. acts that could be enacted by Trump. That proverb is, keep it in mind. Whatever you are at 7, you are the same at 70.
All right, I love all of the good Turkish proverbs we've heard today, so hopefully we'll hear more in the rest of the discussion. Thank you all for sharing your wisdom with us, your remarks. We had quite a discussion, and we are a bit behind, so we're going to take a very, very brief coffee break. Maybe we can reconvene the second panel in about 5 minutes, and thank you all for coming to our first panel today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again to our speakers.